Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Productivity Mastery. My guest today needs no introduction. Guy Kawasaki is the chief evangelist of Canva, the host of Remarkable People podcast. He was the chief evangelist of Apple, a little company you might have heard about, trustee of Wikimedia Foundation, Mercedes Benz brand ambassador, and special assistant to the Motorola division of Google. He's the author of 16 books, the latest one called Think Remarkable. What can I say? A living legend is here with us on the show. Good morning, Guy. How are you today?
I am good. I don't consider myself a living legend. Well, I'm living, but I'm not legendary. So,
A humble living legend is with us on the show. Guy, let's start from your humble beginnings, if we may. What I hear, you're a boy from Honolulu, Hawaii.
yes.
Um, and I'm just wondering, when you were, let's say, 5 years old, growing up, did you imagine your career will unfold like this and you achieve everything you've achieved?
well, there's two things wrong with that question. First of all, you think I remember anything when I was 5 years old? That's 65 years ago. Okay, so that's number one. And number two is 65 years ago, there was no such thing as the internet. There was like very little technology. State of the art was manual typewriters. I mean, yeah, it's inconceivable to think that anybody would have considered personal computers, social media, internet, much less artificial intelligence. So there's no way that anybody thought that life would evolve this way.
But can you maybe, if you can recall, um, tell us a little bit about your upbringing? What were some of the important values and principles in your family, if you remember back then?
Well, I come from a little lower middle class family in Honolulu, Hawaii, so we were not wealthy at all. And my parents, I'm third generation Japanese American, so the second generation of Japanese American really emphasized education. And a sixth grade teacher in my elementary school convinced my parents to take me out of the Hawaii public school system and put me in the private school system, which prepared me to go to college. And if it wasn't for that sixth grade teacher, and if it wasn't for my parents agreeing and my parents making the sacrifice for that to happen, I would not be on your podcast today. I mean, you could, I might be serving you coffee or something, but I would not be on your podcast.
I see. Well, I think everybody is curious to know the story. How did you end up in Apple? Was that an accident, or was it a conscious,
Yeah, it was.
intentional?
Well, okay. So this, if to tell you the whole story, the sixth grade teacher convinces my parents to put me in this school. This school, for some reason, I applied to Stanford and I got in. I don't know how. So I go to Stanford and I meet this guy named Mike Boych, and we shared something in common, which is we both loved cars. Now, the difference between him and me is that he came from a wealthy family, so he had nice cars. I came from a poor family and I wanted nice cars. But we both like nice cars. So we became very good friends. And about 10 years later, he actually hired me into the Macintosh division of Apple. So I will tell you quite transparently that the reason why I got into Apple was because of a friendship. It was pure nepotism. There's nothing to do with my background because education wise, I majored in, of all things, psychology. And most of my career had been spent working for a fine jewelry manufacturing company. So I had no work experience, no educational background that would indicate that I should be the second software evangelist of the Macintosh division. Nothing at all.
That is beautiful to learn a little bit about the story. By the way, there will be some people joining us. So Greg is joining, saying that he enjoyed your keynote at Innovate West in Vancouver. Navid is joining from Austria. Two of my favorites, Stoyan and Guy Kawasaki. So glad to be listening. So there'll be many people, and make sure to post your questions in the comments. We take some questions by the end, but I continue on with unveiling the story. And I'm curious, what was your first impression of meeting Steve Jobs? Um, and now that you can reflect backwards, what do you
Yeah.
admire in him as a leader?
Well,
And
I
maybe,
would say
mm,
that would be the understatement of a lifetime to say anything except that Steve Jobs was a most intimidating person. And, when you met him, you definitely knew that you were probably in over your head. Um, he really was scary to me. He was very intimidating, very smart, very sure of himself. Kind of every story you've heard about Steve Jobs is true, and yet I will tell you that I believe that much of my career success is due to him, and I also believe that fear and intimidation is a very powerful factor in making people achieve things. So, contrary to what most people will tell you about, positive psychology and meeting and, discussing goals and focusing on the positive all the time. Basically, Steve Jobs just scared the shit out of me all the time. And that motivated me to do some of my best work.
and what were you working on early in the first time you were in Apple in the 80s?
In the first time I was at Apple, I was Apple's second software evangelist. So it was my job to meet with software and hardware companies to make Macintosh compatible products.
Right. And then when you came back, you were still an evangelist?
Yeah, well, yeah, I rose up the evangelism hierarchy. So the second time I came back, or the second time I worked at Apple, not the second time I came back because that would imply three times, but it's only two. So when I came back to Apple, I was Apple's fellow and Apple chief evangelist. And at that time, this is 1995, 6, 7, Apple was supposed to die again. And, Michael Dell was saying that Apple should take all the money, give it back to its shareholders, and close up shop. And so I went back to Apple because I loved Apple and I wanted to help Apple survive. So my job the second time was not to work with developers per se, but to just keep the Macintosh community and cult going.
And how did you see the relationship between the two Steves, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak? How did Steve Wozniak manage to handle Jobs for so many years?
You're gonna have to ask him because I don't know. When I was at Apple, this is 83 to 87, 95 to 97. At that point, Woz was no longer active in the company. I mean, he's to this day, I believe he's still an employee, but it's not like he was hanging around and really managing the company. He was already in his current state of Woz being Woz. So I cannot address that relationship. I never saw it in action.
I see. So today, the title of the episode is called Guy Kawasaki on how to think remarkable. And think remarkable is such a phrase. I'm curious to hear the origin story. If you can share, why is it an upgrade, and why did you decide to name your new book Think Remarkable?
Well, I decided to name my book Think Remarkable because in 1997, Apple came up with this great ad campaign called Think Different. And in 1997, if you were using a Macintosh, you were definitely thinking different because the whole world was going to Windows. And so Apple's ad campaign featured people like Picasso, Amelia Earhart, let's see, Richard Branson, Nelson Mandela, Albert Einstein, people you may have heard of before. And the sort of philosophy was, if you want to be as innovative and as remarkable as these people, you need to think different and not think like the crowd. And I loved that ad campaign. And then somebody who was reading the manuscript told me, Guy, you could name your book Think Different because it's a pun and a really homage to Think Different, but except now you want to take it to the next level, which is Think Remarkable. So that's the origin of the title.
And what does it mean to you to think remarkable?
Well, to me, think remarkable means that you want to be remarkable. And the way you become remarkable is you make a difference, that you make the world a better place. So, my book is not called Think Rich or Think Famous. It's called Think Remarkable. And so it's about making a difference for positive change.
And just to wrap up the whole section of Steve Jobs, in the book, you share this little story that there was a time by the end of the campaign. I remember, as I remember, that you confronted Steve Jobs. Can you share the story? And
Yeah.
was it worth it? Was it worth it to confront Steve?
So the first time the marketing staff of Apple saw the Think Different campaign, Lee Clow from Shia Day brought in a video and showed us, various spots. And I think there were about 10 people in the room with me and Steve Jobs. And Lee Clow showed us the ads, and we absolutely loved the ads. And at the end, Lee Clow says to Steve, I have 2 copies of these videos. I'm going to give one to you and one to Guy. And Steve told Lee, don't give one to Guy. So at that point, I said, Steve, what's the matter? Don't you trust me? And Steve said, yeah, Guy, I don't trust you. And then I came right back and I said, that's okay, Steve, because I don't trust you either. That probably cost me $200 million, but it was worth it.
But it was worth it. I love it. Sticking to Evangelist, right?
Well, sometimes you're going to look back on your life and you say, why did I wimp out? Why did I just, why did
Just
I
shut
just
up.
like run for the hills? So I can honestly tell you, I think people were shocked in the room that I would say such a thing. And now
Right,
just
because you
fast forward
confronted
a
the
few more years, and Steve actually offered me a job to come back to Apple, and I
Mm.
turned him down. So yeah, so you're listening to the jackass that left Apple twice and turned Steve Jobs down once. So, you know,
Hello,
200
everybody.
million here, 200 million there. Pretty soon it adds up to real money.
By the way, everybody who's listening to the conversation live, make sure to post us in the comments. Where do you join us from? So we can see, some flags and countries. But I want to continue on exploring more about the book and your intention with it. The book is called Think Remarkable. You just explained what that means. But what is the intention behind it? What is the message that you wanted to convey that you haven't conveyed in your previous 15 books?
Well, in my previous 15 books, predominantly it was basically me explaining my theories and my concepts. Now, in this 16th book, it reflects the wisdom and the information and inspiration that I got from about 200 interviews. So these interviews happen because of my podcast, Remarkable People. And I've had truly remarkable people on my podcast, starting with Jane Goodall, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Stacey Abrams, Angela Duckworth, Steve Wozniak, Stephen Wolfram. I've had 2 MacArthur Award winners. I'm about to have a Nobel Peace Prize winner on it. And I noticed this pattern of, what made these people remarkable. But now the podcast has about 250 hours and 5,000 pages of transcripts, and no one's going to read or listen to all that. So Madison Neismer, my co-author, and I, we reduced it to 170 pages and 88 topics. So that's what we did.
You know what I love about the book? I told you prior to the podcast, but I'll say it again. Um, so when we confirmed you the podcast, obviously I saw the book. I ordered an audio version of the book, and I love it. However, then I got the PDF, the Kindle copy, right? And I just love how structured it is. Like this, like so condensed knowledge, right? It's you can see that probably this is a 50 times bigger book that's been condensed into just the most important content, but everything is kind of structured in bullet points, so simple to
It's
understand.
very structured. Yeah. I mean, you know, I have to read about 50 books a year for my podcast because many of the people who come on my podcast are authors and they're coming out with a new book. So I have to read all these books. And I tell you, a lot of these books, they go for 250 pages to explain one idea. Like one idea, like, oh, get your minimum viable product out there and then see what people say and then change it and make it better. I just explained a book, 250-page book in one sentence, right? And I also noticed that with many of these books, they start a chapter and they go on for like 5, 10, 15 pages with no breaks. It's just, one long, big block of text. And I find that impossible to follow. You need breaks and you need little organization tips. So if you looked at my book, there's 3 sections, there's 3 chapters per section. Each chapter has heads, and each head has subheads and bullet points. And the reason why I know it's so consistent is because I use Microsoft Word, and I flip in Word between outline view and print view. So in the print view, you see kind of what it looks like. But in the outline view, you can compare all the heads, all the subheads, and all the bullets. So it's very easy to see that, every subhead starts with an active verb. And then if any didn't, it would be obvious that, this one is off compared to all the other ones that start with a verb. So you can see that all my heads and all my subheads start with a verb, except for one place. And I call that place out. And so I think the outline format of Microsoft Word is a very good tool for writing nonfiction. I don't know about fiction, but nonfiction. I wish more people would be more organized.
Yeah, me too, man. But I love this about the book, and even the 3 main sections are starting with the same 2 letters. You have growth, you have grit, you have grace. Was that an accident, or was that intentional as
No,
well?
no, 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 no. There are no accidents like that. So I love tricolons, something in 3. I came, I saw, I conquered. And so I love these tricolons. And I kind of believe that the human mind is geared towards things in 3. And I also love alliteration. Alliteration meaning they start with the same, letter or sound. And then the fact that I could find a tricolon with alliteration, that's not just the first word, the first letter, but the second letter too, growth, grit, and grace. I think that's remarkable. I'm so proud of that. And ChatGPT helped me do that. And now I
How
figure, when I die, I'll just change the sections to growth, grit, and grave. Then I'll keep that same tricolon with GR.
well, we hope that that's extended far in the future, and AI and other technologies will help us to keep you here for hundreds more of years. But
Hey,
but now
I
that you're
have
here,
solved that. I have solved that. You want to know something? Really, I have made myself immortal. Okay,
okay,
so you're gonna love this. So I love ChatGPT, and a company found me that says, "Hey, guy, we can make your own personalized LLM." And I said, "Okay, let's do it." So I gave them all my writing, all my videos, all my articles, all my, everything I could gather, including the transcript. Every transcript is uploaded automatically to KawasakiGPT.com. So if you go to KawasakiGPT.com, you can literally ask Guy a question. And I'm telling you, the answers from KawasakiGPT.com are better than if you ask Guy Kawasaki himself, because ChatGPT is smarter than Guy. So now I'll tell you the extreme of this. So many times people ask me for forwards or blurbs or stuff like that, or contributions, short articles to their publication or their blog. And I tell you with a great sense of pride and open and transparency that I go to Kawasaki GPT and I ask myself the question to get the first draft.
no.
And it works just so well. I'm telling you, in 30 seconds, I can have the first draft.
So everybody who's listening now, KawasakiGPT.com, the place to be, the place to ask the right questions. That is fascinating, Guy.
Well, you know what? I mean, I'm dead serious now. Not only do you get what's in Guy's head, but you get the transcript of 200 and 250 and growing by 1 per week of remarkable people. So when you ask a question at Kawasaki GPT, how to give a good presentation, you'll of course find what I think, but it will also cite people in my podcast who have explained how to make a great presentation. So it's not only Guy, but sometimes you're in the head of Angela Duckworth or Katie Milkman or Bob Cialdini or David Ocker. And I don't know any place else you can get that. And the fact that the data set is closed off, so it's just me and my transcripts, means that there's a whole lot less hallucination in Kawasaki GPT.
Fascinating. No, wait. Remarkable. Remarkable. We need to use that more. What a remarkable point. I'm curious, as a young author, I'm just finishing my second book. And I gotta tell you, each of them took me and my co-author close to 2 years of creation.
Yeah.
After 16 books, what is your creative process like? Do you have any specific, I don't know, Stephen King's wake up in the morning, gets his coffee and writes for 5 hours?
Right.
Like, what is your
Listen,
creative process?
I know that theory. I don't use it at all. So I cannot tell you that I'm a good example of that kind of rigid thinking. So I absolutely know that the way you should do this is you get up in the morning. The first thing you do is what's most important, which is you write a minimum of, I don't know, even 1 page, but 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages, 5 pages. You do that, and then you do whatever else you have to do. And I can tell you with total certainty, I'm exactly the opposite. I get up around 4:30, and I start doom scrolling. So I'm like, is Trump in jail yet? Is Rudy Giuliani in jail yet? What's going on in Ukraine? And what's happening with climate change? And, is there more plastic in the ocean? So I'm reading all the doom and gloom. And then I check threads, and I check Instagram, and I look at all the Instagram videos, and I read all the people, going crazy on thread. And then I check my email, and now it's about 6:30, so I get up and I go have coffee, and then I read my emails again, and I look for the ones that Madison say I absolutely have to do. And after I do that, pretty soon it's noon, and now I write for about half an hour, and then I go surfing, so that's another 3 hours, and now it's 4 o'clock, and then I check email, and I do more doom scrolling, and then it's time to eat, and then I'm done eating, so I write for another hour, and then I do more doom scrolling. And I tell you something, if Donald Trump loses, and if everything goes away with all this craziness in America, I could finish a book in about 1/10 the time, because there would be so much less doom scrolling for me. I mean, Donald Trump is a really negative productivity factor in America. I think, really. I mean, besides the fact that he's threatening democracy and all that, think of all the people spending so much time doom scrolling. If Hillary were elected, I would be 10 times more efficient and productive. There's no question in my mind.
Productivity hack number one: remove Donald Trump.
That's that would solve a lot of problems.
Guy, thank you so much for being so open and not trying to look perfect, but actually it's quite liberating to hear from somebody like you, who everybody listening, I would say, would consider a highly productive and creative person with achieved so much, still being able to share. Well, you're not going to be perfect. You're not going to be perfect.
So now people may be listening and saying, guys, so how the hell did you finish 16 books then, right? You describe as like the least efficient person ever. And I'll tell you, the answer to that is that I am fundamentally a driven person. I am OCD, and well, you can see how I organize my book. Somebody has to be OCD to have such an organized book. So I'm telling you, once I start writing, it's very hard to stop me. And I don't need this perfect world where I have this fountain pen with an 18-karat nib and I'm writing on parchment made by Tibetan monks. I mean, I do some of my best writing in like United Airlines row 35 seat B, which is between two people crying with babies and all that. I can write anywhere. I can just tune things out. And that's, you know, I am a living example of grit. I have grit. I have more grit than most people.
Can grit be developed?
I hope so. Otherwise, people won't buy my book.
That's the assumption. Everybody, think Remarkable is the book. It's on Amazon. It's everywhere. You can get the audio copy, the audio version on Audible. You can get the Kindle. You can get a paper book. I have two of them already. So, especially if you love structure,
Yeah.
practical advice.
If you are an author and you want to see how structured a book can be, you should buy Think Remarkable just for that. Just for that. I mean,
There
you may
you
not
go.
agree with anything I say, but if you like structure, man, you have hit the jackpot. There has never been a business book as structured as this.
I agree. I agree. I admire that. So Guy, one thing that I'm recognizing, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but seems like at this very moment you're at the place that you very much know yourself. You know who you are, how you act, and you accept yourself for who you are, not trying to be perfect. Well, thanks God at that stage in life, I guess. But then the question is for the listeners out there, many of them in their 20s, in their 30s, what would be your piece of advice?
Oh, my piece of advice is that, well, besides read the book, which is going to provide you, a little compass. My piece of advice is you just need to keep showing up. That, you know what? I think 90% of the people that you may be competing with, they're going to drop out. They're not going to keep showing up. You just need to keep showing up. It sounds so simple and so easy, but yeah, you'd be amazed how many people just don't keep showing up.
And why is that the case?
I don't know. It's not my problem. I'm glad it's happening.
Because then there's more for the people who continue showing up, right?
I think everything, I mean, by definition, if you're not showing up, nothing else is good is going to happen. I mean, you you need to start right there. Show up. Keep showing up. My God.
The first section of your book is around the concept of growth, and you talk a lot about the growth mindset, a concept that's now more popular than used to be, especially with one of the guests of your podcast writing this amazing book. But I wonder, what does it mean to you, growth mindset, and how do we acquire such a mindset?
Well, the growth mindset means to me that you think that you can learn new skills and new subjects and you can grow, that you're not fixed, that you're not set. And this is the work of Carol Dweck. Let's just give credit to whom credit is due. It's Carol Dweck, who is a friend of mine. And, I took up ice hockey at the age of 44, having never skated. I took up surfing at the age of 60. And you know what? I mean, if you take up ice hockey that late or surfing that late, trust me, you have a growth mindset. I mean, you don't do things like that without a growth mindset. I took up podcasting, you could say, at 65. So that's just who I am. And I fall in love with things. And when I fall in love with something, man, there is no stopping me. That's just the nature of my personality. And I think the growth mindset means that you, first of all, realize that there is such a difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And if you think that you cannot accomplish new things and try new things, you have a fixed mindset. And step one is to realize you have a fixed mindset. Now, I'm not saying that, at 60, I can decide I'm going to play in the NBA. I mean, right. I mean, there are some physical limits, but at 60, you could take up anything. And I could take up piano if I wanted to. And I might not ever be a concert pianist, but, I could learn to play the piano. You got to believe that in your heart.
Something that stuck with me from the book, and I don't know if it's because I had to read it, like it's not like I never heard this phrase before, but really stuck with me reading it, and the way you wrote it there is about the concept of embracing change. You have this part that you talk about, you have to embrace change. And isn't change something that we are avoiding as humans at all costs? why should we embrace change? And can you give us maybe some practical examples in that direction?
Well, I mean, I don't know how you cannot embrace change because the world is changing. So if you're not embracing change and the world is changing, you're going to be left behind. I mean, it is that simple. And I also think that embracing change is fun because you get to learn, you get to grow, you meet new people, you have new experiences. I feel sad. I feel bad for people who don't embrace change. And, I think that in business, many companies never embrace change. And, many of your audience members will never have heard of, at an extreme, Kodak did not embrace digital photography, even though it invented digital photography. And if you're in America and you're old enough, there used to be this thing called Blockbuster where you would go to a brick and mortar store and rent DVDs to watch. And, Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore. And there used to be typewriter companies called Remington Rand and Smith Corona. There used to be mini computers called Data General and Digital Equipment Corporation. And all of those entities refused to embrace change. And that's why they're gone. So you don't want to be the Blockbuster of human beings.
Do you feel like the past 3 4 years the world is going to a lot more change and uncertainty as usual, or do you feel it's more the media, the social media, everything that's
Yeah, I
bombarding us?
mean, I don't know, because I think at every generation always says, "Wow, change is happening so much faster." But I have to say that artificial intelligence, which is about 2 years old for most people, maybe it's 100 years old for the real pioneers, but for most people, you think of AI as only the last couple of years since ChatGPT. I think ChatGPT and LLMs is a bigger deal than personal computing, industrial revolution, social media. I mean, it is an absolute game changer. And, I, let's say it's just tied with the industrial revolution or it's tied with the internet. Although I think it's bigger than both of those things. I mean, that was periods of enormous change. And then, but there's also this political change going on towards fascism and right-wing stuff, and the degradation of democracy and the degradation of women's rights and LGBTQ plus rights and all this kind of stuff. And ah, I I guess maybe for World War II or something, there was as big a threat. But I think we're rapidly approaching that place where we're on the precipice of the potential decline of democracy or the end of democracy. So that could be a huge change too.
And what do you think? Like, by the way, the second book that me and my co-author writing, it's about leadership in uncertain in crisis times. It's called Performing Times of Crisis. I wonder, for these type of uncertain, turbulent times, what do we do as leaders, as individuals, as professionals, to be well prepared and equipped? What kind of skills do we need to embrace?
Well, I guess I need to read your book. I mean, well, I mean, just
I'll send you a signed copy.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you certainly. I hope you agree. You have to embrace change if you're a leader today, right? You cannot just stick to the old ways. Although I'll tell you that I think much of the threat of what's happening here in America is the reliance on the old way, right? That somehow they have figured out the thought that nostalgia is better, that things were better a few decades ago. I mean, and I don't know how they can possibly say that things were better, that all these things that have changed, and we want to return to the old way. I mean,
Hmm.
it makes no sense to me. I mean, there was greater crime before, there was greater disease, there was greater pestilence, there was greater poverty. I mean, if you really looked at the world, we made a lot of progress, and hopefully these past few years, and who knows what's going to happen on November 5th, that's just like a little, little blip in history. But I don't know. I mean, listen, America as we know it could end this November. I mean, it's kind of scary. I gotta come live in Denmark.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Is
I
there
mean, look,
surfing in Denmark?
there is windsurfing for sure. I'm
Not
not, I'm not a surfer.
windsurfing, surfing,
Yeah.
surfing.
Well, I can tell you I'm not a surfer, but I can find out for you. Anybody from Denmark, please let us know in the comments. So okay, look, um, talking about this, one other concept, or the way you pointed it out in the book, is the concept of changing horses. And we had an interesting guest on the podcast. His name is Steve Cadigan. He's a former chief human resource officer at LinkedIn. And we had this conversation. um, I quoted a study that I found that, and I think it was like a few years ago, where they found that people stay at their jobs a lot less than they used to. I think on average, if we look at some of the biggest tech companies, people stay there between 1, 2, 2.5 years on average, which is not much if you compare it to previous generations.
Yeah.
And now you talk in the book about the concept of changing horses. I'm curious if you can kind of elaborate on that.
Well, in the growth section, I talk about two theories. So one theory is you grow along a curve, right? So the world's greatest example of this is Jane Goodall, who from the time she was a kid, she loved animals. And now she's 90 years old and she still loves animals and she's still trying to evangelize a concept of a cleaner, better, safer world for all, living organisms. So she grew from just a little kid to becoming a scientist to now becoming kind of, in my mind, she's kind of a saint for ecology, right? So that's along a curve, but you can also change curves. So the example I cite is Julia Child, who, into her 30s, she was a spook. She was a spy for the CIA's precursor, the OSS. And then she moved to France and fell in love with French cooking, and she became a French chef. So that's changing horses. And, I listen, I think we can talk about how Gen Z and millennials, they're working much shorter times at companies and making more career shifts. And we can express our opinions about whether that's good or bad all we want, but it's happening. So, I mean, my attitude is, listen, I'm not going to change their minds. So we just got to make, what we can out of it and hope that it leads to a good society.
Many of the listeners of the podcast are either working in people and culture, HR, or entrepreneurs, people who are attracting people, hoping that they stay with the company and stay engaged even longer. So what are your observations? What motivates these younger generations to be part of a company, to be part of an organization, and to contribute to it?
I have no freaking idea. I mean, I mean, from the outside looking in, they want to just like work remotely 3 hours a day from Bali or Costa Rica. I mean, um, but I mean, that kind of flies in the face of just show up. I don't mean just show up on virtual meetings from Bali between surf sets. Okay, that's not what I meant by showing up. I guess my attitude is that every older generation judges the younger generation harshly, right? So my father probably said that I didn't work as hard, and then his father said that about him, and I'm saying that about my kids, that they just want to work virtually for 2 hours, 3 hours a day from Costa Rica or Bali. And then, someday when their parents, their kids are going to say, oh my God, mom and dad, you work so hard. You work 3 hours a day from Bali. I don't want to work that hard. I mean, I'm just gonna plug this, prompt into Chat GPT 16, and it's gonna do my whole job for me. I mean, I just think that nostalgia is overrated, and we kind of like we remember things too positively and we consider what's happening today too negatively. Uh,
Mm.
I would say a great metaphor might be music, right? So every older generation says that the current generation's music is shit, right? Like, there's no, like, I bet you my father said, well, who are these people called the Beatles? They're named after an insect, and they come on the Ed Sullivan show and they're just jumping around like like they're crazy people. That's not music. Music is big bands. It's Guy Lombardo, who I was named after. It's Duke Ellington. It's Thelonious Monk. Those are musicians, not the Beatles. And then so now we have all these Beatles fans, and they would probably say, well, what is rap? Rap is just a bunch of profanity and people are screaming at each other, talking about shooting each other. But I promise you, someday people are going to be saying, where are the talented musicians? People who had real musical talent. They wrote great lyrics. They really performed. Like, where are the talented people like Justin Bieber? And I'm telling you, that day is going to happen, and people are going to say, Justin Bieber, you're saying he's the talented musician now? We have come a long way.
That's a great perspective, man. We're so fast to judge. Even me as a millennial, kind of like, oh, these Gen Z people, how do we understand them? It's like I was the one on the bottom, like just some years ago, But so last year I got invited to speak at a conference, and then the organizers asked me, um, can you also moderate the panel? And,
Yeah,
and and then I don't know, I was talking to one of the panelists that I knew, and she was like, oh, let's talk about imposter syndrome.
yeah.
I'm like, okay, who wants to talk about that? But sure. So I moderated the panel, full room. Everybody's like clapping. People are like, it's like, what is going on? It's like it was such a hit. And I wonder, I wonder because, Guy, you're a legend. I mean, you might not say it, but you're a legend. Do you ever have to deal with imposter syndrome?
Well, the imposter syndrome, for people who are not familiar with the term, it means that you think that you are an imposter and that you're not as qualified or accomplished as people think you are. So you think that you are a fake and you will be discovered.
Hmm.
And when you're discovered, people are going to figure out that you're not nearly what you are, and you're going to be like thrown out or something like that. And I will tell you something, that I interviewed over 200 people, and I think about 60 or 70% were women. I interview more women than men for my podcast because, quite frankly, I think there are more remarkable women than men, but that's a different subject. So anyway, so I've talked to all these people, and women always bring up imposter syndrome. I cannot think of a man who said, I went through imposter syndrome in my career. Now,
It was the women. It
I,
was the women at that conference that brought it up as well.
yeah, I mean, now it cannot be that men don't have the imposter syndrome. I
Mm.
think that they are just so full of shit that they cannot even bring themselves to consider that they might not be qualified, right? And so, they say that when people apply for jobs, the men all go in saying, yeah, I'm amply qualified for this. Of course I can do this. And the women are not sure. And in fact, in many cases, the women are probably more qualified than the male applicant, right? So yeah, so that imposter syndrome is for real. So if you're suffering from the imposter syndrome right now, I have some tips for you. So tip number one is, the fact that we have named it the imposter syndrome, that it's a recognized sort of phenomena, that should give you a hint that you are not alone. You're probably not the only person in the room who has imposter syndrome. Probably everybody in the room has imposter syndrome. So you're not alone. I mean, it's a recognized phenomenon. That's number one. And number two, when you're feeling this feeling of imposter syndrome and it's a named phenomenon, now you can just say, okay, so everybody has this. I'll just park this part of my psyche in the imposter syndrome. I don't have to like belabor myself and let it take over my whole thinking. It's the imposter syndrome. Everybody has it. We just put it over there. It's like some people have long COVID. Some people have imposter syndrome. I'd rather have, let me put it to you this way. I think it's better to have imposter syndrome and be worried that you may not be as qualified as people think you are than to have the entitlement syndrome. And the entitlement syndrome is, of course, I'm entitled to be on this board of directors. Of course, I'm entitled to be the CEO. Of course, I'm entitled to this raise and this bonus. I am so freaking amazing and so remarkable. I'm entitled to this. I'm telling you, that's a much worse syndrome to have. So you could be thankful you have the imposter syndrome, because if you have the imposter syndrome and you react carefully, you will keep showing up. You will show growth and grit so that someday you can say to yourself, of course I have all this. I deserve it. Not because you're entitled, but because you truly do deserve it.
I just want to take a moment and say thank you so much for being so no filter, honest, and just saying things as they are. Because I don't know, when I was little and I was growing up, I'm Bulgarian. I grew up in Bulgaria, small country in Eastern Europe, right? Small town. And I used to watch these movies with these incredible movie stars like Arnold Schwarzenegger and popular personalities. And I'm pretty sure many people watching and listening to this podcast looking at you, read all your books, and they kind of feel like this guy's perfect. This guy's perfect. He's one of these chosen ones.
Oh man, you are delusional. Not you, but I mean, people listening to this. If you think I'm perfect, oh my God, listen. When you find people who think they are perfect, I guarantee you that you have encountered somebody who is highly imperfect and bullshitting you and trying to cover that. I guarantee you. I would guarantee you that if you went and had a conversation with Jane Goodall and said, Jane, do you think you're perfect? There is no way she would say yes. And I would say that the amount of perfection that is actually there is inversely related to the amount of perfection the person believes he or she represents, which is to say, the more a person thinks they're perfect, the less perfect they are. It's that simple. Like, I give you the world's greatest example of this. Do you think that Donald Trump thinks he's perfect? I do. I think he's absolutely convinced he's perfect. I rest my case.
But do you like? That's great what you say. I just wonder, like if you can give us, like, do you have bad days and like you wake up and you're moody and when you do, what do you do? What are some of the things you do to get yourself into a better mental state, that's more cheerful mood, so to say?
I have to say that I'm kind of in my DNA. I am just a cheerful person. I very, very seldom get down and depressed and in the dumps. And I don't know why that is. I mean, maybe I was just born with the happy gene. But I will tell you that a lot of it is it's the grit, and I just keep showing up. Like, I don't know how to not show up. I am 70 years old. I have enough money to last me the rest of my lifetime and more, but I still love to do my podcast. And like, I bet a lot of people are 70 years old. They're just sitting around watching Fox all day, right? And they're convinced of the conspiracy, and like Hunter Biden's laptop, and that's their biggest concerns in life. And like, Jesus, I mean, I just want to find more remarkable people to interview. That's my goal. And I seriously, I think my podcast is the best work that I've ever done in my career. It also might be the least appreciated, but it's the best work that I've done in my career.
I just want to invite everybody who's listening and enjoys this podcast, go check out Remarkable People with Guy Kawasaki. You can find it on Apple Podcasts. You can find it on Spotify, any major platform. Subscribe, give it a rating. And if you have a remarkable person you want to recommend, make sure to make a note. Send it to Guy and his team.
Yeah, thank you. You know, it's funny. I Madison and I, we probably turn down 10 people a day for my podcast. So I'd say we probably return down, 2,500 people a year, and we take 50. So it's the odds of getting on my podcast are 1 out of 50. So I can tell you that it's harder to get on my podcast than to get into Harvard or Stanford.
But that's why it's quality, Guy. That's why it's quality. And I just want to wrap
and
up.
you know what? You cannot give me a building to get on my podcast.
I know we have just a couple of minutes, and I wanna respect your time, Guy. But I want to finish with a kind of question to wrap it all up. Many of the guests on your podcast resonate with the concept of the Japanese concept of Ikigai.
Yeah.
And maybe if you can just share quickly about what that is. Most people probably heard about it, but most importantly, what is Guy's Kawasaki's Ikigai?
Yeah. So Ikigai is a Japanese word, and it describes, it's hard to translate. It's kind of like defining some German words. That Ikigai is this calling in life, the reason you get up every morning. And, like if you look up Ikigai, and if you go to YouTube and, go look up on YouTube, Japanese living treasures. The Japanese have this concept of a living treasure. I think there's about 50 in the country. And these people, they're like the best swords maker, the best kettle maker, the best ceramics, the best, kimono, the best whatever. And you watch what they do to make a sword or a kimono or a knife or something. And you realize that, it's not the money anymore. They're just doing it. That's their Ikigai. That's why they want to make the best sword. And I think that you should be so lucky to discover your Ikigai. And during your life, your Ikigai can change. So you can have several Ikigais. And I would say that my podcast and my writing are my Ikigais. That's, sometimes people ask me, so why did you write 16 books? Are you going to do a 17th book? And it's almost like I cannot stop myself. I love the, what I love about my podcast is the prep. It takes so much prep to have a good podcast, and people don't appreciate that. I think many people think that the way you do a podcast is your producer hands you the Wikipedia entry for the guest like 5 minutes before, and then you just make shit up, and they don't understand. It's like 3, 4, 5 hours of prep to ask 10 questions. It takes a lot to do a podcast. I've calculated that the amount of human time spent on each episode of my podcast is 20 to 22 hours. I don't know how much you spend, but that's how much we spend. And it really is, truly a labor of love. That's what your Ikigai is.
No, I can fully resonate, man. And I mean, just for this episode, I don't know how many hours I spent, but definitely, a couple of days, not full days, but just reading the book, getting through all the questions, looking at all these questions and things from your biography, listening to many podcast interviews so I can ask something different and still true to the values of the podcast. So it's, once again, everybody, I want to respect your time, Guy. I want to keep you here, but I know you have some meetings to attend to. So just want to remind everybody, ladies and gentlemen.
Surfing. Literally,
that's not literally.
When this ends, I'm going surfing.
Okay,
that's my Ikigai too.
Let's not keep Guy away from surfing, but just want to remind everybody the book is available everywhere. This is the audible version. Think Remarkable, Guy Kawasaki with Madison.
Oh, and hey, you know what? Let me send you something here. in case you don't read or you don't want to read or whatever, this is a free online course that Canva and I created about how to be remarkable. So you can
Okay.
send that to all the people you know.
Okay. Okay. I got it in the chat. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Guy. We don't want
All
to
right.
keep
Thank
you away from
you.
the surfing. Thanks,
All right.
everybody, for being with us. Make sure to buy the book. Subscribe to Guy's podcast, Remarkable People. And once again, thank you, Guy, for being with us. Thanks
Oh,
for
my
sharing.
pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for being such a well-prepared host.
I appreciate it, Guy.
Bye-bye.
Guy, that was